look at Booker T. Washington and his contributions to education and black businesses, compiling data that supports vocational education, trades, business development, and its relationship to reducing the racial wealth gap.
So let's look at a couple of things. So there is an organization called Greater MSP, and there's regional indicators. And so we have 11 other regions that we compare ourselves to that consider their competition with, what we call MSP, which is Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And so those peer regions are Atlanta, Austin, Boston, Charlotte, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver, Pittsburgh, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, and then Seattle. When we look at education and kind of where the Minneapolis, region falls, when you look at a 3-year graduation rate, and that's based off of completion for a 2-year, we're at 49%. So we are actually, in reference to our peers, we run 6th. Which is not good, when you look at a 2-year institution. If you look at a 6-year graduation rate at 4-year institutions, we're about 72%. So we're actually in the peer ranking based off of those cities I just named, we're number 3. Based off of what you just talked about, when you look at data and you look at statistics, when you pare it down to what I would call the BIPOC community, so our Black, Indigenous, and people of color, more specifically, I'd probably hone in on, what I would say our Black heritage. And so that's either African American or Black immigrant. You're going to see the data that is going to vary. And part of that is we're in a day and age right now. I work at a 2-year institution, and so we have 75% of our students are part-time. So when you look at that, then that time frame of graduating in 3 years actually is probably elongated. It's probably going to be more like a 5-year stint. And then you look at the resources that are available to them. So that's the other piece, that why you have numbers that are going to be skewed is because of that same reason. So they may not have necessarily the financial, means, or they go to a community or a technical institution and bring back VOTEC because it's a quicker way to enter into the workforce. It's greatly tied to industry trends. So look at the manufacturing industry, look at the information technology industry, also looking at healthcare. Healthcare, as we know, is a huge industry game changer. I guess I'll say that, especially when you look at where we're in right now. We're in a pandemic. And so we're looking at our frontline workers and how they've been impacted by this pandemic, and looking at the statistics and the data, around that it's going to be skewed. And so when we look at what Booker T. Washington has done, opened up the gates for education, but also it's also opened up the gates to see where the disparities are, I would say, have widened. So we know the gap in education has widened as a result to this pandemic. Why? Because people didn't have the resources. So if you take the K-12 system, they did distance learning, and you had families that did not have access to technology. Or you look at, again, my world as a post-secondary education, we had the same thing where food insecurities were high. We also had, financial, insecurities were high as well, where people had to either absolutely drop out because of the fact that they couldn't no longer afford it, or they were spending so much time either on food and transportation or other aspects that it caused them to say, I can no longer, continue my education. I actually have to work, or I have to figure out how I'm even going to make ends meet because of that.
How your organization specifically is working with Black communities to promote Black entrepreneurship and ownership.
So we are located, because I know this is going to be broadcast widely, so we're located in what's called the northwest suburbs of Minneapolis. And we work with our, CBOs, our community-based organizations that are right out here in Brooklyn Park. So there's one specific organization that we work with, and it's called ACER, African Career Education Resources. We also work with and are closely linked with another organization, NEON, which is Northside Economic Opportunity Network. Those two organizations really look at, Black entrepreneurship, more specifically, how do we get started? So what's the viability? If you have an idea or concept and you want to move that into, entrepreneurship, then those organizations work with you on that. We also have an entrepreneurship certificate that we try to align what we're doing from a formalized education and then working with those organizations as well. There's also a couple of other governmental entities that we work with. So the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage, which is definitely one of the organizations that we're directly linked to. And the reason why we're linked to them is because their direct role is to be an advisement to the governor around policies. So looking at, business development dollars, how can we add more dollars and create policies around that? Can we do direct allocations? And then how does that tie back to our students that are pursuing, entrepreneur-like efforts as well?
Last question on here. The removal of vocational educational training from high school, which is now coming back, comparing VOTEC versus four-year college degrees, the average pay of a college student versus trade school graduate.
Yeah, so I love the fact that, VOTEC is actually coming back into the high schools. If you even kind of think even further back, so at one point in time, I'm dating myself, but at one point in time, when we were looking at careers, it started in high school. Now we're saying you actually need to go back to middle school. You need to start as early as middle school, introduce some of those trades. So get them out there in the field, so that they're looking at manufacturing. Get them, out there so that they're understanding and, walking through and doing a job shadow for information technology. Artificial intelligence is something, that's huge. Cybersecurity, data analytics. And so you're doing and you're seeing more hands-on that's happening, with our VOTEC and starting from the high schools and then building it all the way up to, what I would say our world today, which is post-secondary education. The beauty about this, and I can think of a former employee that I had, her son is in information technology, who makes six figures, does not have a college degree, but because he has gotten what is called industry recognized credentials, that has availed him the opportunity to make as much as either his parents make, or make more than his parents based off of, what we would call VOTEC education. So we're seeing that it's coming back because people are looking at what are some of the workforce trends, how do we move, closer into industry versus saying, I don't want to be in school, 15, 12 years. And I know that seems like a long time, but if you add K-12 and then you add, post-secondary, folks are saying, I don't want to be in school that long. I want to be able to, get the education that I need and then kind of move forward into, whatever career path. And so that's why you're seeing that all of these industries are kind of saying, I want you to understand manufacturing. I want you to understand healthcare. Agriculture is another one. We don't talk a lot about that. I know that there was just a segment literally yesterday on the news talking about agriculture and black farming. So how do we grow our own? It all builds up into generational wealth, having a legacy, but it also, shows that there's a huge racial wealth divide as well. And so being able to kind of tap into some of those industry recognized credentials, for those that can't afford to necessarily go to school, I would say that would be the way to go.
Perfect. One last question. What would you like to see in our community? And that's
Broad.
broad. You individually, because everybody has their own, like, man, I wish this is,
Yeah.
what would you?
I would honestly love to see us mobilize. And what I mean by that is we have so many talents, skills, and abilities, and we have the wherewithal, I guess would be another, way to say it, for us to basically close this racial wealth gap. If we can talk about, saving, the art of saving, if we can talk about how do you even build out a budget. I can think back to when I was a child and I didn't ask those questions. I mean, I didn't know, I knew my parents worked, obviously, but I grew up in a two-parent household. We didn't talk about, wealth. We didn't talk about budgeting. We didn't talk about saving. The savings that we talk about or the giving that we talked about was built from the church. So as we know it to be tithes and offerings. That's what we talked about. But for me to say, hey, if I have an interest in going to school, how am I going to pay for school? Do I need to even create a budget? What does a household budget look like when I, decide to leave? That was not talked about. So if we can figure out and mobilize those around financial experts, around experts around mental health, being able to have just like we would have a shared workspace for entrepreneurs, why couldn't we create, community wealth building? And so being able to have different segments, different sessions, doing a series, doing conferences such as this one, but doing it on a smaller scale and doing it around the community, I think that's really what I would like to see happen. And then each one teach one. So how do we build and create our own scholarships for our folks so that those that are interested in being able to pursue their educational attainment, then we're able to help them because we're lifting as we climb. And that's what I would like to see in our community.